This is Heliox, where evidence meets empathy. Independent, moderated, timely, deep, gentle, clinical, global, and community conversations about things that matter. Breathe easy, we go deep and lightly surface the big ideas.
By the year 2050, the global prevalence of dementia is expected to triple.
Yeah, it's a genuinely staggering projection.
It really is. I mean, we are staring down this unavoidable demographic tidal wave.
Right, because just as the global population reaches these totally unprecedented ages, the sheer number of people facing severe cognitive decline is, well, it's just going to skyrocket.
And when you just look at that top-line projection, it feels completely paralyzing. Like it feels like this creeping, inevitable fog that you just can't escape.
It's an intimidating statistic for sure, and I think that's primarily because of how we've traditionally viewed neurocognitive health.
Right, like an on-off switch.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there is a certain comfort in structural precision. Like, if you break your arm, an X-ray reveals a jagged white line. It's binary.
You're broken or you're not broken.
Right, broken or not broken. But step into the realm of dementia, and that X-ray machine effectively stops working.
You just can't point to a single snapped bone.
No, you can't. You're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is incredibly murky. It's compounded by, decades of invisible biological and environmental wear and tear.
Which is why the massive silver lining we are exploring today completely reshapes that whole landscape.
It really does. The traditional view frames dementia as a sort of predetermined genetic destiny. You draw a bad hand of DNA and the fog rolls in.
But the reality, as we're going to see, is radically different. I mean, we are moving from passive acceptance to active strategic defense.
Yeah, total paradigm shift.
Okay, let's unpack this, because our mission for this deep dive is to explore a groundbreaking comparative cross-sectional study that was published in the Lancet.
And the headline finding here is just incredible. An astonishing 45% of the global dementia burden is actually attributable to 14 modifiable risk factors.
45%. That means nearly half of the risk comes down to elements we can actually change, treat, or prevent.
Exactly. We aren't entirely at the mercy of our genes. Our environment, our societal structures, and, well, our long-term choices play a profoundly dominant role.
And the scale of the source material we are working with here is just unprecedented. I mean, they looked at so many people.
Oh, it's massive. The researchers synthesized harmonized data from 14 different countries and regions, capturing the health profiles of over 214,000 people.
Wow.
Yeah, 214,251 people over the age of 50, to be exact. We are talking about data spanning from high-income countries like Ireland and the U.S. all the way over to low- and middle-income countries like China, Mexico, Brazil, and India.
Over 200,000 people.
Yeah.
So the goal here is to basically map out the geography of memory, right?
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
We want to understand how the country you live in, your gender, and your level of schooling create this highly specific, customized recipe for dementia risk.
And critically, how mapping these global patterns reveals mechanisms that can actually help you protect your own brain.
But, okay, before we get to the actual findings, I have to challenge the methodology a little bit here.
Sure, go for it.
You mentioned harmonized data across 14 vastly different nations. How do you even accomplish that? I mean, a medical survey in a rural clinic in India isn't going to look anything like an electronic health record in a London hospital.
What's fascinating here is the sheer statistical heavy lifting required to make those disparate data sets talk to each other.
Because you can't just compare raw numbers.
Exactly, you can't. Harmonization means finding the lowest common denominator across all those global surveys and standardizing the definitions.
How does that look in practice?
Well, for example, some countries might measure physical activity in minutes per week, right? While others might just ask if a person performs manual labor at work.
Oh, I see. So totally different metrics.
Right. So the researchers had to recode all those localized variables into standardized binary categories. Like, does this person meet the World Health Organization's threshold for sufficient physical activity? Yes or no?
So they essentially build a universal translator for global health data.
That is exactly what they did.
And that finally allows us to compare apples to apples, which matters because historically our data on dementia has been incredibly skewed, hasn't it?
Heavily skewed. If you only study the brain health of, say, a retired accountant in the UK or a suburbanite in the US, you are entirely missing the biological reality of a manual laborer in Mexico or a grandmother in rural China.
And the demographic explosion of aging is happening globally.
Right, yet our public health guidelines have been almost exclusively informed by data from high-income countries. So this Lancet study runs 12 established modifiable risk factors through a global stress test.
To see how human biology reacts to radically different economic and cultural environments.
Exactly.
Well, let's lay out those 12 risk factors so we know what we're actually dealing with here.
Go for it.
The list includes low education, hearing loss, high LDL cholesterol, depression, physical inactivity, diabetes, smoking, hypertension, obesity, excessive alcohol consumption, social isolation, and vision loss.
It's quite the list.
It is. I look at this list, and it honestly feels like a global restaurant menu. Like everyone, regardless of their nationality, is ordering from this exact same menu.
I like that analogy.
But the popular dishes, the specific risks that dominate a population, change wildly depending on the GDP of the country you're sitting in.
The menu analogy captures the dynamic perfectly. The underlying biological vulnerabilities, the way a human brain degrades, those are universal.
But the local environment dictates which of those vulnerabilities are actually triggered.
Precisely. And the data on low education provides probably the starkest of contrast here.
How so?
Well, education acts as a massive buffer against dementia by building what neuroscientists call cognitive reserve.
Okay, cognitive reserve.
Right. In a high-income country like the U.S., the prevalence of low education in this over 50 population sits at around 12%.
Which, is a significant chunk of the population, but it feels like a manageable public health target.
Right. But when we shift focus to China, a middle-income country in this data set, the prevalence of low education in that exact same over 50 age bracket skyrockets to 85.6%.
Wait, 85.6%?
Yeah, nearly 9 out of every 10 people in that demographic.
That isn't just a slight statistical variation. That is an entirely different societal reality.
It really is.
But we need to explain the mechanism here. How does sitting in a classroom for a few extra years in your youth, physically protect your neurons from decaying half a century later?
It all comes down to synaptic density and neuroplasticity.
Okay, break that down for me.
When you engage in formal education, you are forcing your brain to constantly wire and rewire itself. You're building thicker, more robust networks of synapses, the connections between your neurons.
So it's like a workout for the brain structure itself.
Think of it like building a sprawling, complex highway system in a major city. If a bridge collapses on one route, and that collapsed bridge represents the physical plaques and tangles that accumulate in the brain as dementia sets in, well, a highly educated brain has a dozen alternate routes to bypass the damage.
Ah, I see. The traffic just diverts, and the city keeps functioning.
Exactly. The person doesn't show symptoms of memory loss because their brain is literally routing around the physical damage.
That is wild.
Conversely, if someone has low education, their neural highway system might only have a few main roads.
So if one of those roads gets blocked by amyloid plaques,
the entire system gridlocks. Symptoms of cognitive decline appear much earlier and progress much faster.
So in a country like China, where historical access to schooling for this older generation was severely limited, a lack of cognitive reserve becomes the dominant, overwhelming risk factor for dementia.
Exactly. It's the most prominent issue they face in that cohort.
So in China, low education is the special of the day on our menu. Let's look at a different dish entirely.
Let's do it.
In the U.S., obesity is practically a public health epidemic. The study puts the U.S. obesity prevalence for this over 50 demographic at a staggering 44.9%.
Nearly half the population.
But the economic context shifts the menu again, right?
It does. We look at India, and the obesity prevalence drops to 13.3%.
Wow, that's a big drop.
And then we look at South Korea. Now, South Korea is a highly developed, high-income country, yet their obesity rate is remarkably low, sitting at just 6.2%.
Wait, 6.2% in South Korea compared to 44.9% in the U.S.?
Yep.
But both have high GDPs, both have modern infrastructure. I mean, that completely shatters the idea that wealth automatically breeds metabolic disease.
It really does. There are deeply ingrained cultural diets, urban planning strategies that encourage walking, and totally different lifestyle norms at play.
Though I do have to ask about the harmonization process again here.
Sure.
An American body and a South Korean body might carry weight differently. Did the researchers actually account for that?
They absolutely had to adjust the parameters. They couldn't just use the standard Western metric for obesity across the board.
How did they adjust it?
For the US and European cohorts, obesity was defined by a body mass index, or BMI, threshold of 30. But for the Asian cohorts, China, South Korea, Malaysia, India, they used a lowered threshold of 27.5.
Really? Why lower the bar for one group and not the other?
Because of underlying physiological differences in adipose tissue distribution.
Meaning where the fat is stored.
Exactly. Extensive epidemiological data shows that Asian populations tend to accumulate visceral fat, that's the dangerous fat packed around the internal organs, at a much lower overall body weight compared to populations of European descent.
And why is visceral fat so dangerous for the brain?
Well, visceral fat is highly metabolically active. It pumps inflammatory cytokines directly into the bloodstream.
And those inflammatory cytokines, I assume, travel up to the brain.
They do. They cross the blood-brain barrier and trigger chronic neuroinflammation, which is a massive accelerator of neuronal death. So Asian populations hit that dangerous threshold of metabolic dysfunction and cardiovascular risk at a lower BMI.
But even with the researchers using that more sensitive adjusted threshold, South Korea's obesity rate was still incredibly low at 6%.
Right. It highlights a massive cultural difference in health outcomes despite similar economic status.
Okay, so we have these stark geographical divides. Education dominates in China. Obesity dominates in the U.S. But scanning this global menu, is there anything that is universally toxic?
What do you mean?
Like, are there risk factors that simply do not care about borders or wealth or culture?
Yes. The data points a massive red arrow at two factors in particular: hypertension and smoking.
Okay, the universal bad guys.
High blood pressure, or hypertension, ranked in the top 4 risks across every single one of the 14 countries and regions analyzed. It is a ubiquitous threat to the human brain.
And the numbers are just alarming. In Mexico, hypertension prevalence is a massive 53.1%.
Over half the population over 50.
In Brazil, it's 49%. In China, it's over 40%. It seems so removed from the brain, though. Like, how does elevated pressure in your arm physically destroy your memory?
It's all about the blood vessels.
I tend to think of the vascular system like the plumbing in an old house.
Yeah.
Is that close?
That analogy is highly accurate, actually. The brain is an incredibly greedy organ. It only accounts for about 2% of your body weight, but it demands 20% of your blood supply.
So it needs a lot of flow.
It needs a massive, uninterrupted flow of oxygen and glucose just to maintain basic function. So hypertension is like cranking up the water pressure in those old pipes.
Ouch.
Over years and decades, that high pressure physically scours and damages the delicate endothelial lining of the blood vessels.
So the pipes start to stiffen, they narrow, and I'm guessing they lose their elasticity.
And eventually they crack. Deep within the brain's white matter, hypertension causes thousands of microscopic bleeds, known as microinfarcts.
Microscopic bleeds. Do you even know that's happening?
No, you don't feel them happening. You don't go to the hospital. But each tiny bleed destroys a small cluster of neurons. It's this silent, cumulative engine of vascular dementia.
That is terrifying. And smoking, you said, operates as the partner in crime to that vascular destruction.
It does. The study found smoking in the top 4 risks for 12 out of the 14 regions.
Because it's a double whammy for the blood vessels.
Exactly. Smoking unleashes a dual attack. First, the thousands of chemicals in cigarette smoke act as free radicals, causing severe oxidative stress that directly damages brain cells.
And the second attack.
Second, it aggressively accelerates atherosclerosis. That's the buildup of plaque in those exact same blood vessels we just talked about.
So if hypertension is high water pressure,
smoking is like pouring corrosive acid and mineral sludge down the pipes at the exact same time.
Okay, so the geography sets the macro landscape. A high-income country presents a landscape littered with metabolic landmines, like obesity and high cholesterol, while a low or middle-income country presents a landscape dominated by structural deficits, like low education.
Or blood speaking.
But geography is just the map. What happens when we zoom in on the individuals living inside those borders?
Well, this is where the data starts revealing some profound demographic paradoxes, particularly when we look at age and generation.
How so?
The basic biological assumption is that as a human ages, risk factors compound. A 75-year-old should present a heavier burden of health issues than a 55-year-old, simply due to the accumulation of cellular damage and environmental exposure over time.
Right, basic wear and tear on the machine.
And the data supports that baseline. Across all countries, the 70-plus demographic exhibits higher rates of things like hearing loss, vision loss, and hypertension compared to the younger 50 to 69 bracket.
Makes sense.
But it's the gap between those two generations that tells a fascinating story, specifically when we look at the prevalence of low education.
Okay, I have a stat for this. Let's compare England and Malaysia to see this gap. In England, adults 70 and older are 157% more likely to have low education compared to the younger 50 to 69 group.
That is a staggering generational cliff. You cross a specific age threshold, and the educational profile of the entire population just entirely shifts.
But look at Malaysia. There, the older adults are only 30% more likely to have low education compared to the younger group. The cliff is gone. It's just a gentle slope.
Right.
Okay, let's unpack this because we aren't really looking at biological aging anymore here, are we? We are looking at a fossilized record of political history showing up in a modern health survey.
Exactly. Health data as a historical record.
That 157% gap in England reflects a massive, rapid societal intervention. The UK passed the Education Act in 1944.
Right, following World War II.
Right. It overhauled secondary education, raised the leaving age, made it free. The younger cohort in this study, the boomers, they caught the wave of that massive structural change.
They stayed in school and they built cognitive reserve.
And the older generation completely missed it.
The policy hit one generation and bypassed the parents entirely. Now, in Malaysia, the expansion of mass education occurred over a different, less compressed timeline.
So it didn't create that massive, stark divide.
Right. The specific rapid shift that divided families in Europe didn't map onto the Malaysian generational timeline in the exact same way between those two specific age cohorts.
It's just incredible to think that a piece of legislation passed 80 years ago is directly dictating the physical resilience of millions of brains today.
It's a powerful reminder of how policy is healthcare.
But if age reveals historical shifts, gender reveals something even more complex. Here's where it gets really interesting, because going into this, you have to assume that cardiovascular biology is basically universal, right?
I think so, yeah.
Like a human pancreas operates the exact same way, whether it's sitting in Ireland or sitting in Brazil.
The biological mechanisms of insulin resistance do remain constant, but the data shatters the assumption that disease distribution is purely biological.
Give me an example.
Let's look at diabetes, which is a major driver of vascular dementia and heavily linked to Alzheimer's disease. We actually often refer to Alzheimer's as type 3 diabetes.
Wait, really? Type 3 diabetes?
Yeah, due to how insulin resistance in the brain prevents neurons from absorbing glucose. They basically starve.
Wow. Okay, so how does this tie into gender and geography?
Well, in high-income countries like Ireland, the data shows that women are 35% less likely to have diabetes than men.
Okay, so the men are carrying the heavier metabolic burden there.
Right. But then the study travels to Latin America. In Brazil, women are 21% more likely to have diabetes than men.
This script completely flips based purely on the continent.
Exactly.
I have to push back on this, though. Are we absolutely sure this is a real biological difference, or is this like a diagnostic illusion?
What do you mean by diagnostic illusion?
Is it possible that in Brazil, women are just going to the doctor more often than men, so they get diagnosed more? Or is the men actually have it but just don't know it?
It's a really critical methodological question, and the researchers anticipated this exact bias. This is why the data harmonization was so vital.
Oh, so they didn't just ask them.
No, the study didn't just rely on participants saying, my doctor told me I have diabetes. For many of these cohorts, including the Latin American ones, they utilized objective biomarkers.
They took blood?
They took blood samples, they measured HbA1c levels and fasting plasma glucose, they caught the undiagnosed cases. The flip is biologically real.
Wow. If the blood work confirms it, then we really have to look outside the human body for an explanation.
We do.
How does simply being a woman in Brazil make you significantly more vulnerable to a metabolic disease compared to being a woman in Ireland?
It proves that dementia risk is fundamentally inseparable from societal structure. The biological vulnerability is triggered by structural inequality.
So stress, basically.
Yes. When we see a flip like that, we have to examine the allostatic load. That's the cumulative physical toll of chronic stress. In Brazil, compared to Ireland, what are the differences in who performs exhausting manual labor versus sedentary work?
Right.
What is the gender disparity in access to preventative health care? Who controls the household finances to purchase high-quality, non-processed food?
So if societal norms in a specific region dictate that women manage intense, unsupported caregiving roles for extended families while also managing the household.
Their baseline cortisol levels, their stress hormones, are going to be chronically elevated.
And chronic cortisol elevation actively promotes insulin resistance.
It does. It tells the body to hoard fat, particularly that dangerous visceral fat we mentioned earlier.
Oh, it's all connected.
Very much so. The study also noted that the education gradients were much larger for women across most of these regions.
Meaning what exactly?
Meaning if a man and a woman both have low education, the woman's risk of developing hypertension or diabetes accelerates much faster than the man's.
A lack of education punishes women's bodies more severely.
Exactly.
That really highlights how utterly insufficient it is to just tell people to, eat a balanced diet and exercise. We are completely ignoring the invisible socioeconomic currents they're swimming against.
It's a huge blind spot in public health messaging.
But speaking of gender, while the metabolic risks flipped depending on the geography, wasn't there one psychological burden that unfairly targeted women pretty much everywhere on the map?
Unfortunately, yes. The data revealed a universal female burden. Across 13 of the 14 countries and regions, symptoms of depression and social isolation were significantly more prevalent in women.
13 out of 14. That transcends borders, GDP, culture, everything.
Yeah.
We know that depression is deeply toxic to the brain, but how does chronic depression physically accelerate cognitive decline?
It returns to that prolonged exposure to stress hormones. Chronic depression maintains high levels of cortisol in the brain. Over time, high cortisol physically shrinks the hippocampus.
And the hippocampus is the brain's primary memory center, right?
Yeah, it is. High cortisol causes neurons there to retract their dendrites, which are the branches they use to communicate with each other.
So the brain literally shrinks and disconnects from itself.
And social isolation compounds this. The human brain evolved to process complex social interactions. Without that constant stimulation, neural networks begin to atrophy simply from disuse.
Why are women globally carrying this psychological weight, though?
It reflects global constants in social structure. Women universally bear the brunt of informal caregiving, which is profoundly isolating and stressful.
That makes sense.
Furthermore, women generally have longer life expectancies than men, meaning they're far more likely to outlive their spouses and end up living alone. And living alone was the study's primary definition of social isolation.
Add in historical economic dependencies, where older women often reach late life with fewer financial resources of their own, and you have a perfect storm for chronic anxiety, depression, and isolation.
Exactly, a perfect storm.
Okay, so we've mapped out a highly individualized landscape here. The specific risks threatening your brain depend on the macroeconomic reality of your country, the educational policies of the decade you were born in, and the societal pressures dictated by your gender.
It's a very tailored risk profile.
But all of this discussion still implies a sort of isolated, siloed approach. I would challenge this framework.
Okay.
We are talking about these 12 factors individually. We say this population struggles with diabetes, or that population struggles with hearing loss.
Right.
But human bodies aren't spreadsheets. We don't exist as neatly organized columns of single, isolated ailments. If I have one of these risk factors, what is the mathematical probability that I am battling another?
That is the crucial question.
Are we absolutely sure these diseases aren't just colliding randomly in the body?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the researchers recognize that exact flaw in how we usually talk about public health. They didn't just calculate the isolated prevalence of each disease.
What did they do instead?
They analyzed the joint distribution. They wanted to see if these risk factors operate as lone wolves or if they travel in packs.
And what did they find?
The reality they uncovered completely alters how we must approach treatment. Over 50% of people across all 14 countries and regions have at least two of these risk factors simultaneously.
Half the global population, over 50, is fighting a war on multiple fronts.
And the burden gets much heavier. In 11 of the 14 regions, over 20% of the population, that's 1 in every 5 adults over 50, is managing at least 4 risk factors concurrently.
4 separate biological or environmental failures at the exact same time.
Right.
Imagine trying to manage insulin levels for diabetes, taking medication for hypertension, struggling with the physical limitations of obesity, and battling the daily reality of social isolation. The sheer cognitive bandwidth required just to survive that daily routine is exhausting.
It is. It's overwhelming.
Where did the researchers find the heaviest burden of these overlapping risks?
The Latin American cohorts exhibited the absolute highest density of co-occurring risks. In Mexico, individuals carried on average 35% of the total measured risk factors.
Wow.
Brazil was right behind at 34%, China sat at 31%, and the US was at 29%.
I look at this co-occurrence, and I think of these risk factors as, like, bad house guests.
Bad house guests.
Yeah. Smoking never just shows up to the party alone. It brings its loud friend, excessive alcohol. They crash on your couch, and suddenly you aren't sleeping well, your diet falls apart, and you stop exercising. One bad guest actively recruits another until the house is completely trashed.
That's a great way to visualize it. The question then becomes, are these house guests showing up together randomly, or are there predictable alliances?
Right. Do they always invite the same friends?
To figure this out, the researchers utilized a statistical technique called principal component analysis, or PCA.
Okay, stop right there. Principal component analysis sounds like a term an engineer throws out to end a conversation at a party. How does that actually work in plain English?
Fair enough. Think of PCA like analyzing the listening habits of millions of music fans to identify underlying genres.
Okay, I'm with you.
You don't tell the algorithm what jazz or heavy metal is, you just feed it massive amounts of data. Person A listens to distortion guitars, fast drums, and screaming vocals. Person B listens to saxophones, upright bass, and piano.
So the algorithm just identifies the clusters of traits that naturally travel together.
Exactly. Without any human bias telling it what to look for, PCA does the exact same thing with diseases. The researchers fed the algorithm the health profiles of 214,000 people to see which biological traits consistently group together.
So they let the math find the hidden recipes. What did the algorithm spit out? Did the clusters change depending on the country?
That is the most profound discovery of the whole study. Despite the vast cultural, geographic, and economic differences, whether you are a laborer in rural India, a banker in London, or a teacher in Chicago, the human body clusters these risks in exactly the same 3 ways worldwide.
Wait, really? The exact same 3 ways everywhere?
Yes. The specific prevalence of the cluster might change, but the alliances remain rigidly identical.
The biological blueprints are universal.
They are.
Walk me through the 3 clusters then.
Cluster number 1 is the cardiovascular cluster. The algorithm found that diabetes, high cholesterol, hypertension, and often obesity relentlessly group together.
The metabolic nightmare. Going back to our plumbing analogy, this makes perfect mechanistic sense, though.
It does.
If your body is struggling with insulin resistance, your cells aren't absorbing glucose, so your liver starts churning out more lipids, which drives up your cholesterol.
Yep, the sludge builds up.
That mineral sludge builds up in the pipes, narrowing them. The heart has to pump harder to push blood through the sludge, driving up the water pressure, which is hypertension. The entire system is just feeding back on itself.
Exactly. A failure in one mechanism cascades into the others. Now, if the first cluster is a mechanical failure of the plumbing, the second seems entirely behavioral.
Okay.
Cluster number 2 is the lifestyle cluster, primarily featuring smoking and excessive alcohol consumption.
The behavioral partners in crime. But the damage they cause is just as physical as the cardiovascular cluster,
Oh, absolutely.
because excessive alcohol acts as a direct neurotoxin, inducing inflammation and physically shrinking brain volume over time, while smoking damages the blood-brain barrier. They are synergistically breaking down the brain's defenses.
Which brings us to the final grouping. Cluster number 3 is the sensory and social cluster. This is where poor hearing, poor vision, and low education consistently group together.
Okay, let's unpack this because the first 2 clusters make obvious intuitive sense. Biology drives biology. Behavior drives behavior.
Right.
But poor hearing, poor vision, and low education. I highly doubt that sitting in a classroom for fewer years biologically causes your retinas to degenerate or your auditory nerve to fail.
No, it doesn't.
Why on earth do sensory failures cluster with a lack of schooling?
This raises a really important question about the mediating mechanisms of poverty. You're absolutely right. Low education doesn't directly cause a cataract.
Right.
What it does cause is lower lifetime earnings. If an individual has a lower income trajectory, they lack the resources to access specialized healthcare. They can't afford regular optometry exams, expensive bifocals, or high-quality hearing aids.
Ah, okay. So the baseline biological degradation of the eyes and ears happens to everyone at roughly the same rate as we age.
Yes, biology is biology.
But the uncorrected sensory loss, the kind that makes you explicitly report poor vision or poor hearing on a global health survey, that specific uncorrected failure clusters with low education because the individual lacks the capital to buy the technological fix.
Exactly. And furthermore, remember how the study defines social isolation?
Living alone?
Living alone. When you suffer from uncorrected hearing and vision loss, navigating the external world becomes fraught with anxiety.
You can't hear the conversation at a loud family dinner, so you just stop going. Driving at night becomes terrifying because you can't see the road sign, so you stay home.
Right. The uncorrected sensory loss actively constructs the social isolation. And from a neurological standpoint, when you lose your hearing, you suffer from two mechanisms of cognitive decline simultaneously.
Two, what's the first one?
First is the sensory deprivation hypothesis. Without the constant influx of sound data, the auditory cortex of the brain begins to physically atrophy from disuse.
Use it or lose it.
Exactly. Second is the cognitive load hypothesis.
Meaning the brain is working so hard just to decode garbled sounds that it doesn't have the energy left to actually encode the memory of what was said.
Precisely. The brain shifts its finite resources from memory formation to simple auditory processing. It's a devastating cascade, all rooted initially in the socioeconomic limitation of low education.
Wow. So what does this all mean? We have zoomed out to see the global map, realizing that the specific menu of risks is entirely localized by a country's GDP and history.
Yes.
But we've also zoomed into the cellular level, proving that the way these risks cluster together into cardiovascular, lifestyle, and sensory packs is a universal human constant.
It's a lot to hold in your head at once.
It is. If the problem is this tangled, how do we actually build a defense? We can't just tell people to do a daily crossword puzzle and hope for the best.
No, we definitely can't. The core takeaway of this Lancet study is the absolute futility of a one-size-fits-all global health policy.
Right.
You cannot take a dementia prevention strategy optimized for the United States, which might direct billions of dollars into pharmaceutical interventions for obesity and high cholesterol, and blindly deploy it in rural China, where the primary driver of cognitive decline is low education and uncorrected sensory loss.
The defense must be ruthlessly context-specific.
It has to be.
Fighting obesity in a country with a 6% obesity rate is a catastrophic misallocation of public health resources. You have to fight the enemy that is actually in the room.
Exactly.
But how does this translate to the individual? How does someone listening to this right now, managing their own life, use this data to protect their brain?
This is where the researchers point to the necessity of multi-domain interventions. They specifically highlight something called the FINGER trial.
The FINGER trial, what does that stand for?
It stands for the Finnish Geriatric Intervention Study to Prevent Cognitive Impairment and Disability.
Okay, that's a mouthful.
It is. But the FINGER trial revolutionized our understanding of prevention because it fundamentally accepted the reality of the clusters we just discussed.
Because risk factors travel in packs, interventions must also travel in packs.
That's exactly it. You can't just evict one bad house guest and leave the others sleeping on the couch.
So what did the trial actually do?
The FINGER trial utilized a highly coordinated simultaneous attack. They didn't just hand participants a diet sheet, they implemented a rigorous Nordic diet, replacing saturated fats with rapeseed oil, increasing fish consumption for omega-3s, and emphasizing berries and vegetables to combat oxidative stress.
Okay, so diet was step one.
But they didn't stop there. Simultaneously, participants underwent intense, computerized cognitive training focusing on executive function and processing speed.
Working out the brain.
Yes. They also engaged in heavily monitored aerobic and strength training physical exercise. And, critically, they had constant clinical monitoring to aggressively manage vascular risks like blood pressure and cholesterol.
Wow. It's an ecosystem approach to the body. Everything at once.
Exact.
So for you, the listener, the immediate application is to look at your own biological clusters. Do not operate in silos. If your doctor flags that your blood pressure is creeping up, do not just accept a prescription for a beta blocker and consider the job done.
Right, because you now know that hypertension is part of the cardiovascular cluster.
It is a siren warning you that the other house guests, high cholesterol, insulin resistance, weight gain, are either already in the house or knocking on the door. You have to become hypervigilant about the entire metabolic ecosystem.
And the exact same logic applies to the lifestyle cluster. If you are drinking excessively, it is statistically highly probable that it is linked to other behavioral risks, or it is masking untreated depression.
You cannot effectively treat the drinking without addressing the interconnected psychological and behavioral cluster.
Exactly.
But beyond the individual biology, there is a massive societal aha moment buried in this data. We talk extensively about the sensory and social cluster, The fact that low education groups tightly with uncorrected vision loss, hearing loss, and social isolation.
Right.
If a lack of early education is the foundational domino that triggers a lifetime of downstream risks, then fighting for better schools is no longer just an economic or moral imperative.
It radically reframes the very definition of public health. This data insists that fighting poverty, improving literacy rates, and ensuring equitable access to early childhood education are literal dementia prevention strategies.
That's amazing.
When a government invests in a robust, high-quality public school system, they are actively reducing the neurocognitive burden on their healthcare system 50 years into the future. It is a long-term neurological investment in the physical architecture of their citizens' brains.
That shifts the perspective entirely. We tend to fiercely medicalize dementia. We pour billions into laboratories searching for a pharmaceutical silver bullet to clear away amyloid plaques. But this study demands we look upstream.
Way upstream.
A first-grade teacher teaching a child to read is acting as a frontline healthcare worker in the fight against Alzheimer's disease. Social determinants of health are brain health.
Beautifully said. By recognizing those social determinants and understanding how biology clusters the damage, both individuals and governments can finally stop playing whack-a-mole with single diseases.
We can move toward designing holistic, multi-domain defenses that actually reflect the complexity of human life.
Exactly.
Well, we started this deep dive with a terrifying premise: the prevalence of dementia tripling by the year 2050. It felt like an unstoppable force. But by unpacking this study, we've essentially mapped out a landscape of hope.
We really have.
45% of this disease process is in our hands, or at least in the collective hands of our societies. We've learned that our specific vulnerabilities are dictated by where we live, the era we were born into, and the societal pressures placed on our gender.
But beneath that beautiful, complex diversity, the way our bodies break down is universally predictable.
The cardiovascular cluster, the lifestyle cluster, the sensory-social cluster. Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over, derived directly from the mechanics of that third cluster.
Okay, let's hear it.
We discussed how low education drives poverty, which prevents people from correcting their failing eyesight and hearing, which in turn physically traps them in social isolation. Isolation degrades the brain. Now, imagine an elderly person sitting alone in their house, cut off from their family and community.
It's a tragically common scenario.
It is. When we try to solve the crisis of elderly isolation, we often look for massive societal or high-tech interventions. We try to build expensive new community centers, design complex brain training apps, or engineer social programs. But what if the most powerful, most effective cognitive and social intervention we have is radically simple?
What do you have in mind?
What if the ultimate way to instantly cure a massive portion of the world's social isolation isn't a new app, but simply buying a pair of prescription glasses or a high-quality hearing aid for an elder who cannot afford them?
Wow.
If failing senses physically sever your connection to the world, making conversations impossible, and reading an exhausting chore, then correcting that sensory input instantly rewrites your reality. It brings you back into the room.
It reconnects you to the social grid, stopping the atrophy of your auditory cortex and eliminating the cognitive overload.
Exactly. By simply providing a piece of curved glass or a tiny microphone, we might fundamentally stave off dementia better than almost any pharmaceutical on the market.
It forces us to question where we prioritize our healthcare resources. A hearing aid isn't just a volume dial. It is a vital tether to human connection. And human connection is the ultimate cognitive fuel.
So as you go about your day, think about your own geography of memory. What specific items are on your personal menu of risk, and how can you address the entire cluster, not just the isolated symptom?
We might not have a clean, perfectly clear X-ray for dementia just yet. The landscape might still hold some fog.
But studies of this magnitude are handing us a brilliant flashlight. We just have to be willing to look closely at what it illuminates and act on it.
Moving away from the illusion of a single, simple cure and embracing the reality of a complex, interconnected life.
Keep exploring, keep questioning, and take care of your brain. Heliox is produced by Michelle Brucker and Scott Bleakley. It features reviews of emerging research and ideas from leading thinkers, curated under their creative direction with AI assistance for voice, imagery, and composition. Systemic voices and illustrative images of people are representative tools, not depictions of specific individuals. Thanks for listening today. 4 recurring narratives underlie every episode: boundary dissolution, adaptive complexity, embodied knowledge, and quantum-like uncertainty. These aren't just philosophical musings, but frameworks for understanding our modern world. We hope you continue exploring our other episodes, responding to the content, and checking out our related articles at helioxpodcast.substack.com.